I didn't take my brother's company. He handed it to me the moment he stopped listening. That's the line people never believe, because it's easier to blame the woman who finally stood up than the man who refused to sit down. But the truth never needed their permission. This story begins in an office built on ambition and denial. A startup my brother once controlled with confidence so loud, it drowned out every warning sign. I was the quiet one, the one people overlooked, the one who signed documents, fixed budgets, and held the company together while he soaked in the spotlight. And for a long time, silence was easier than confrontation. But then the numbers broke, the market collapsed, and the debts he ignored finally screamed loud enough to be heard. When the company cracked open, so did the story we'd never dared to examine. The imbalance between us wasn't an accident. It was a pattern, one I had helped maintain. What followed wasn't revenge. It wasn't sabotage. It was accountability, the kind that shows up disguised as consequence. You're about to hear the truth the rumors never bother to include. The late nights, the contracts he didn't read, the moment the conversion clause triggered and the power shifted without a single raised voice. You'll see what it costs to hold a boundary for the first time, and what grows in a family when someone stops shrinking. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told to keep the peace, the story will feel painfully familiar, and maybe a little liberating. Stay with me, and if you want more stories like this, quiet justice, emotional truth, and endings that actually mean something, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. My brother pitched his startup the way some people confess love. Fast, glowing, and with hands that couldn't stay still. We sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, the kind where the lights are warm, but the air feels cooler than it should. My cup had gone lukewarm, untouched for too long, but I kept listening. He talked about market gaps, strategic velocity, and a future so bright it almost felt rehearsed. When he finally paused, he leaned back and asked, almost softly, "So, can you help?" I looked at him, the boy who once chased away the neighbor's dog for me, and exhaled. "What do you need?" His smile was quick, too quick. As he explained the plan, my mind drifted, back to scraped knees and after-school storms, when he'd grab my hand and walk me home like it was his sworn duty. Back then, he always stood a little in front of me, as if trouble needed to get through him before it reached me. I trusted that version of him instinctively, without ever thinking about why. Sitting across from him now, with stock projections spread between our cups, I searched for that same boy in the man before me. Some days, nostalgia is a fog. Today, it felt like a mirror I wanted to believe. "I don't need someone to control things," he said, tapping the table with the edge of a sugar packet. "I just need someone who believes in me." There was a tiny emphasis on believes, like he was slipping a hand into an old pocket, checking if something valuable was still there. I nodded before thinking it through. Classic mistake. "Of course," I said. "You can count on me." He smiled again. Not quick this time. Slow. Relieved. I didn't realize I had just given him something far bigger than money. Permission. He pulled out the convertible note like it was a formality. "It's simple," he said. "Standard stuff." The pen clicked softly, a small metallic sound that somehow felt louder than the clinking cups around us. I skimmed the pages, but the font seemed to shrink the more I stared. Startup paper had a way of looking clean while hiding landmines. He slid the pen toward me. The steam from my coffee blurred the edges of the page. Motifs in hindsight. The cooling cup, the dim light, the gleam on the paper. I signed because he was my brother. Later that night at home, I read the document again. The phrase, private investment, sat on the page like a smudge that wouldn't wipe off. Something inside me tugged. Hesitation. The soft kind. The kind you can still ignore if you breathe shallow enough. I closed the laptop and pushed the papers aside. Doubt feels heavier when you don't want it to be right. I told myself that trust mattered more than technicalities. That family deserved the benefit of the doubt. That reading contracts too carefully made you the difficult one. It's astonishing how easily we rationalize what we wish were true. A text arrived near midnight. You're officially part of the team. Couldn't do this without you. The screen glow lit my bedroom ceiling and, for a moment, I let myself feel proud. Then, lying in the dim light, a strange thought passed through me. Quick. Quiet. Part of the team has so many meanings. Some flattering, some less so. Voiceover if life had one. I didn't know then that part could also mean the part that works without being paid. And the coffee cup still sitting on my desk had gone completely cold. On my first morning at the office, the hallway lights flickered the way old ambitions do. Bright for a second, then uncertain. The space was smaller than I imagined. Just a handful of desks squeezed together like roommates who hadn't learned boundaries. A wall of stacked folders greeted me, reaching almost to my shoulder. They looked less like documents and more like a quiet warning. Still, I felt a little thrill, the possibility of building something, of being part of something that mattered. I hung my coat on the edge of a chair because there was no hook. No place for anything to truly belong. A nervous excitement sat between my ribs, the kind that feels like hope if you squint at it. My brother introduced me with the bright confidence of someone tossing confetti. "This is my sister," he announced. "She'll handle administrative stuff." Administrative. That word hit the table with the dull weight of a misstep. I managed a polite smile, the kind you give when you're trying not to look like you've just swallowed a lemon seed. A few employees nodded, distracted, already returning to their screens. I told myself titles didn't matter, not today, because I didn't want to seem fragile. But a small piece of me tugged at my sleeve, whispering that this wasn't the role he described in the coffee shop. The first hour became a choreography of directions barked with casual authority. "Print this. Email that. Make coffee." Not a single please wandered into the room. I'd never minded helping, but the imbalance felt strangely familiar, an echo of childhood chores dressed up as office tasks. "Grab me a refill?" he asked, already turning away. It wasn't malicious. It was muscle memory for him. And maybe for me too, considering how quickly I obeyed. The laptop hummed beneath my hands, but the work wasn't strategic or financial. It was clerical, reactive. I kept telling myself this was temporary, that trust required patience. Yet patience, in the wrong place, can feel like surrender. The printer sputtered like it was clearing its throat for a complaint. Pages spilled unevenly into the output tray, warm and crinkled at the edges. The smell of overheated toner clung to the room. Behind me, the coffee machine hissed and steamed, bubbling louder than the conversations I wasn't part of. A micro moment, just a few seconds, where the office's noises felt like commentary. I reached for the stack of papers, and the static snapped against my fingertips. It startled me more than it should have. A tiny jolt I pretended not to feel. The mundane sounds became the soundtrack of a reality settling in. This wasn't the meaningful partnership I had imagined. When I carried the printed reports to the table, I caught the sideways glances, not malicious, just puzzled, assessing. One employee whispered something I couldn't hear, and another shrugged, as if my presence didn't quite compute. They looked at me the way people look at someone delivering mail, not someone holding a piece of the company's future. It struck me then. Nobody believed I was here as an investor, or a strategist, or even an equal. They saw someone who fetched coffee, who printed documents, a helper, a convenience. Quietly, I told myself not to take it personally, but a part of me curled inward, the part that knew exactly what being underestimated felt like. That afternoon, sitting alone at a cluttered desk that had clearly belonged to someone before me, I started writing things down. Not tasks, patterns. How he spoke, what he delegated, what he avoided. Little behaviors, small imbalances, the tone shifts when he addressed others versus when he addressed me. I didn't know why I was documenting it, only that something inside insisted on it. A low, persistent intuition rising beneath the surface. It wasn't the work I expected to do, but in a strange way it was the first real work of mine that day. Somewhere deep down a thought whispered, "Pay attention, you'll need this later." My mother set the table the way she always did, neatly, intentionally, as if preparing for a guest more important than the people actually sitting there. The overhead light cast a soft yellow wash across the plates, making everything look warmer than it felt. My brother slid into his chair with the confidence of someone who expected applause. "Work's been intense," he said, before anyone even asked. Mom beamed. "That's because you're ambitious. That's how leaders operate." Then her eyes drifted to me, gentle but dismissive in their own way. "And you're still helping him with paperwork, right?" Her tone wrapped itself in concern, but it carried a faint suggestion. Some children climb, some children follow. My brother didn't hesitate to clarify my role. "She's just helping with admin stuff. Keeps things running." Just helping. The words landed like crumbs brushed off a tablecloth, harmless in appearance, but they told a story all the same. I smiled, because disagreeing felt unnecessary, maybe even ungrateful. The spoon in my hand clinked softly against the bowl, a tiny sound that somehow echoed louder than anyone's praise for him. Mom nodded approvingly, as if my supporting role confirmed something she'd always believed about the natural order between us. I focused on the stew, the rising steam blurring the moment just enough for me to breathe. A memory surfaced, uninvited but insistent. Me, 10 years old, stuck on long division. Him, 13, leaning over my workbook. "You got this," he'd said, tapping my pencil. "You're actually smarter than you think." Back then, his confidence in me felt like armor. Tonight, though, he corrected me without encouragement, talked over me without noticing, and claimed credit without asking if I wanted any. "You're mistaken," he said at one point, pointing at a detail in his own story. It wasn't important, but the casualness of it stung. Memory is funny. It can feel like comfort or contrast. Tonight, it felt like loss. The dining room light flickered slightly, the way old bulbs do when someone closes a distant door. My mother's wine glass reflected the glow, the red swirling lazily inside it. My brother recounted his week like he was giving a keynote. Rising action, tension, one minor victory. Everyone listened. I traced my finger along the edge of my plate, grounding myself in something physical, something steady. The silverware clinked and chimed as if marking time between the versions of us. Who we were, who we pretended to be, who we'd become without noticing. Outside, a car drove by, and the headlights swept across the wall like a passing thought. Somewhere between the second helping and dessert, a quiet truth crept in. Fairness wasn't a norm here. It was an accident. My mother praised his work ethic again, then praised his vision, then praised how he took responsibility for the family. Responsibility. I nearly laughed, but the sound died before it reached my throat. I watched him nod, accepting each compliment like a refill he didn't need. Meanwhile, I felt the small, steady ache of being seen as useful but not respected, present but not important. It wasn't anger, it was recognition. That soft, painful kind that feels like waking up to a room you've lived in your whole life, but never truly looked at. On the drive home, the dinner replayed in fragments. His praise, my silence, Mom's assumptions. None of it was new, and maybe that's what bothered me most. Patterns don't shout, they whisper until they become the wallpaper. I wondered, not defensively, just honestly, whether I had invested in my brother's company or in the hope that he still saw me as an equal. The streetlights passed overhead like slow blinks. Somewhere inside me, a quieter voice finally spoke. If the cost of loyalty is dignity, what exactly are you buying? The question lingered, heavier than dessert. The break happened on a Tuesday. Those days always feel harmless until they're not. The office air was thick with a mix of burnt coffee and tension when my brother stormed out of his corner workspace. He slammed a spreadsheet onto my desk, the pages trembling from the impact. How am I supposed to get accurate projections with mistakes like this? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of accusation. Every head in the room lifted. Some froze. Some pretended to keep typing. I stared at the numbers, knowing the error wasn't mine, but logic didn't matter. Emotion had already taken the wheel. Embarrassment crept up my neck, hot, pulsing, undeserved. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking just enough to betray me. He kept talking, short, clipped syllables that sounded like reprimands disguised as leadership. I swallowed slowly, trying to stay composed, trying not to feed the spectacle. A younger employee shot me a sympathetic glance before looking away, as if eye contact might get him drafted into the scene. "I'll fix it," I said quietly, though every part of me knew the mistake was in a data source he had changed without telling anyone. But pride bends in families, even when it shouldn't. So I bent, again. The sound of the keyboard filled the silence between us. It was quick, uneven, a nervous rhythm I couldn't quite steady. Every keystroke felt amplified, like someone had turned the volume up on my hesitation. The office light flickered, catching the edge of the monitor and giving everything a faint blue tint. The micro motif of noise returned, the clacking keys, the shallow inhale, the quiet shifts of people trying to look busy. My heartbeat synced with the tapping, each one sharp enough to remind me I was crossing some emotional threshold. Not just humiliated, but aware of the imbalance, aware of myself. When he finally walked away, a colleague, Mira, the operations lead, leaned closer. She kept her voice low, careful. "You don't have to take that," she whispered, eyes steady but gentle. I forced a smile. "It's fine." "It's not," she insisted, then pretended to adjust her monitor when he glanced back. The kindness in her tone hit harder than the criticism that came before it. That simple moment, a quiet solidarity from someone who owed me nothing, made the room feel suddenly different. People saw. People noticed. And for the first time, I wondered if I had mistaken patience for endurance. A thought formed slowly, like condensation on glass. I had defended him for so long that I'd forgotten to defend myself. My brother's anger wasn't leadership. It was fear, dressed in authority. I'd seen it in small ways, the tightening of his jaw when things didn't go his way, the way he brushed aside responsibility with the confidence of someone who expected others to absorb it for him. Yet I had kept giving him grace, because that's what siblings do, right? But as I stared at the spreadsheet, the truth settled in my chest. Blood ties don't justify bruised dignity, and mine had been bruising in silence for months. That night I found myself sitting at my kitchen counter long after the lights should have been off. The only glow came from my laptop, the cursor blinking like a pulse waiting for direction. On instinct, I opened a new tab and typed, "Convertible note." Articles unfolded across the screen, terms, clauses, investor rights, things I should have understood from the start but had trusted him to explain. I read until my eyes burned, driven not by suspicion exactly, but by something deeper. The feeling that I had stepped into a game without learning the rules. As midnight deepened, one thought echoed. If I'm going to help him, I need to know what he isn't saying. By the next evening, my dining table looked like an improvised war room. Papers spread everywhere, highlighters uncapped, a half-eaten sandwich abandoned on a coaster. I read through financial terms with the intensity of someone trying to decode a map left behind by a stranger. Margin calls, vesting schedules, liquidation preferences. None of it was new to the world, but it was new to the version of me who'd signed documents out of trust rather than clarity. I printed several explanations of convertible notes, underlining phrases until the ink bled slightly through the page. The quiet of the room made every turn of paper sound like a small revelation. I wasn't lost. I was waking up. Convertible notes, as it turned out, weren't just friendly IOUs. They were instruments built for leverage, bridges between debt and ownership. One clause in particular caught my eye. The conversion triggered during insolvency. The wording glowed at me from the screen, sharp and unapologetic. My fingertips brushed the edge of the page, the way you touch something fragile before admitting it's powerful. In the reflection of the laptop, my face looked both tired and newly alert. It hit me then. I hadn't invested as a sibling. I'd invested as a creditor with dormant rights. And rights, once understood, stopped being dormant. A strange mix of guilt and clarity rolled through me, like stepping into cold water and realizing you're more awake than you expected. Was this learning an act of betrayal? Was I crossing a line by understanding the contract I'd signed? Every question sounded absurd the moment it formed. Knowledge wasn't betrayal, it was oxygen. Still, a small ache pulsed behind my ribs. I had wanted to believe he valued my insight, not just my money. But as I traced each legal footnote, I realized I couldn't keep pretending we were building something together, when all I'd been handed was busywork wrapped in gratitude. At some point, I leaned back and whispered to myself, if he treats me like an outsider, I might as well act like one. It wasn't anger, it was alignment. Not revenge, awareness. He had spoken to me for months like I didn't understand the business, like I was a helper wandering in a territory too complex for me. So I read deeper. Convertible notes, valuation caps, discount rates. The language of power. Silent, intricate, precise. Every new piece of information settled into place like a puzzle clicking together. Understanding didn't distance me from him, it returned me to myself. The micro motif arrived quietly. The soft, intentional click of my mouse as I saved a document titled Revised Terms, Draft. I didn't know why I named it that, only that the words felt honest. My eyes were tired, but my mind was steady. I was no longer reacting to his moods, I was responding to facts. The more I read,
the clearer it became that the original agreement had been written to benefit him entirely, assuming I would never look closely. But assumptions lose their power the moment they're inspected. I saved the file again, this time hearing the click for what it was, a boundary forming. By the time I stood to stretch, the clock on the stove read 2:17 a.m. The world outside was silent except for a passing truck somewhere in the distance, humming like a low reminder of life moving on. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the glow fade from my hands. I hadn't mastered everything, but I'd crossed a threshold. I could feel it. Understanding the note didn't make me disloyal, pretending ignorance would have. The thought settled in with a surprising calm. I'm learning the language he never expected me to speak. And once you learn a language, you can rewrite the conversation. The next morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise. The building was still half asleep, its hallways dim, its doors shut like secrets. I sat at my desk with a fresh mug of coffee and opened the draft I'd written the night before. The screen cast a pale rectangle of light across my hands as I began shaping the new agreement. Cleaner terms, proper protections,
actual equity triggers. It wasn't rebellion. It was correction. My breath synced with the scroll of the mouse, calm and steady. Every sentence I rewrote felt like stitching up a tear I hadn't noticed when the fabric was still new. For the first time since joining the company, the work in front of me felt like mine. My brother walked in late, carrying the kind of exhaustion that comes from late-night pacing rather than late-night working. He skimmed the surface of the day like a stone thrown too quickly. "Do you have the new agreement?" he asked, barely glancing at me. I handed him the printed copy, clean, clipped, spotless. He didn't read it, not a single line. "Looks fine," he said, signing his name with the same casualness someone uses to confirm a package delivery. The pen made a crisp stroke across the paper, a signature built on trust he assumed I still owed him. A part of me tightened at the ease of it. The micro motif returned. The soft, deliberate tap of the pen hitting the tabletop after he signed. It sounded almost gentle, almost ceremonial. I watched him go about his morning, oblivious to the shift that had just taken place. He didn't know the clauses I'd inserted, the protections I'd built. Not traps, but guardrails. For months, I'd been absorbing his decisions. Today he absorbed mine without question. The contrast was stark enough to leave a faint tremor in my chest. Not excitement, not guilt. Something quieter, steadier. Self-recognition. While updating the digital copy, a memory surfaced. Our first meeting in the cafe. The warmth of the light. The untouched coffee cooling between us. Back then, trust had felt like a cushion softening every step. Now the office light was cold, bright, almost surgical. The difference wasn't the environment, it was my clarity. As I typed, the edges of that first moment sharpened in my mind. I remembered the hopeful tug in my chest when he said he needed me. I also remembered the weight of the pen when I signed without reading. This time, the weight was mine to place, not carry. When everyone else stepped out for lunch, I stayed behind, reviewing the documents again. I checked each clause slowly, like an artist examining a nearly finished piece, not out of doubt, but care. It struck me that legal language, for all its complexity, was honest in a way people sometimes weren't. It said exactly what it meant, even when what it meant was uncomfortable. I saved the final version to a separate folder, clean, dated, traceable. My initials appeared in the metadata. That small detail grounded me. I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't plotting anything. I was simply naming the truth of my role. As the afternoon settled into a low hum, I felt something unexpected. A calm fear. Not fear of him. Fear of losing the version of myself who had once agreed to be small. I could sense her. Slipping. Dissolving. Making room for someone steadier. I closed the folder gently, my hand firm but not trembling. The office outside buzzed with emails, deadlines, meetings. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. But inside, something had changed. Not loudly, not proudly, just decidedly. I wasn't afraid of disappointing him anymore. I was afraid of disappointing myself. The first signs of the company's unraveling didn't roar, they sighed. A missing invoice here, a canceled client meeting there, a few too many emails labeled urgent but sent at odd hours. Revenue dipped in a slow, almost graceful slide, like a curtain lowering before anyone realized the play was over. By the end of the month, 2 engineers quit within days of each other. Burnout, they said, though their eyes suggested something closer to disappointment. The office felt different. Air heavier, jokes shorter, silences longer. My brother paced more than he worked, wearing grooves into the cheap carpet as if motion alone could reverse the trend. I watched quietly, not out of apathy but out of clarity. Things fall apart exactly the way they're built. Blame became his default language. He blamed the market for being unpredictable. He blamed the team for being too slow. He blamed investors for not appreciating vision. He never blamed himself, not even in the pauses where truth usually slips through. Meanwhile, his frustration splashed onto everyone within reach. Instructions became demands. Feedback became monologues. Gratitude vanished completely. He would hover behind employees' chairs, correcting insignificant details with the sting of someone trying to outrun his own fear. And beneath all of that, he avoided my eyes. Not because he resented me, but because he knew I saw the cracks forming long before he admitted they existed. So I worked silently. The same tasks, the same patterns, but with different intent. Clean hands, clear mind. I brewed the morning coffee, sorted invoices, updated spreadsheets. None of it offended me anymore because I no longer mistook these duties for my worth. He dropped by my desk with a stack of receipts and a half-formed complaint. "Can you handle this?" I nodded, not as compliance but as observation. His voice carried a brittle edge, the sound of someone spiraling while pretending they were soaring. In the background, the radiator hissed softly, like the universe trying to soothe a room refusing to be soothed. Small breakdowns became daily rituals. The printer jammed so often it wheezed like an asthmatic marathoner. The copier spat out misaligned pages. The office Wi-Fi blinked in and out, as if it too was reconsidering its loyalty. Every faulty machine felt like a metaphor, tiny protests from the infrastructure he had neglected. One afternoon, the printer refused to release a stack of reports. I tugged the tray open, and the paper inside was crumpled, folded like an exhausted sigh. The micro-motif returned as I pressed the reset button. The crackle of the jammed sheet, the clunk of the rollers, the stubborn insistence of something that wasn't built to last under pressure. Neither was he. Watching the company falter wasn't satisfying. It was sobering. I didn't want it to fail. I wanted it to grow up. But growth requires humility, and humility was the one resource my brother refused to stock. He'd spin small problems into grand threats, then expect someone else to rescue him from the story he created. At night, I replayed his restless pacing, the way his voice rose an octave whenever someone challenged him. I thought back to the boy who once protected me from playground taunts. Now he was the one cornered, by his own unchecked certainty. I wished he would just stop running long enough to see himself clearly. The day he finally asked for money, he did it softly, almost tenderly. He stood by my desk, hands in his pockets, voice stripped of bravado. "I need a cash bridge, just something temporary." He tried to smile, but it flickered like a dying bulb. I opened the drawer beside me. Inside lay the revised contract, the one he had signed without reading. My fingers grazed its edge. Not yet, I thought. Timing mattered. Instead, I said, "Let's talk about options later today." He nodded, relieved. He walked away believing I was his safety net. He didn't realize I was now a boundary, not a cushion. We met in the conference room that afternoon, its glass walls catching the late sun in narrow, unforgiving stripes. He looked tired, less like a founder, more like someone who hadn't slept through a full night in weeks. "I just need a short-term buyback," he said. "A little liquidity to get us through the dip." I slid a folder across the table, already prepared. Inside was the agreement to purchase his outstanding debt, my debt, back into my hands. His face lit up with relief. "You're saving me," he said, almost whispering. I smiled, gently. "Let's hope so." The truth sat between us like a quiet witness. He didn't read a word. He didn't ask a single question. Trust is loud. Understanding is silent. He signed with the same hurried confidence he used to skim legal disclaimers at the bottom of emails. His pen scratched across the paper, leaving a trail of ink that felt heavier than it looked. "You have no idea how much this means," he said, leaning back, exhaling as if the room had finally expanded enough for him to breathe. I nodded, folding the document with careful precision. I believe in helping where I can, I replied. He heard generosity, I heard accuracy. His gratitude settled into the room like a misplaced blessing, warm, earnest, and based entirely on a misunderstanding he didn't realize he'd created. His hand trembled slightly as he initialed the margin notes, an almost imperceptible quake that revealed more than his words ever had. The afternoon light bounced off the glossy surface of the table, illuminating the document like it was something sacred. He pushed the signed pages toward me and exhaled again. Relief, dependence, faith. I held the papers delicately, as if they were newly developed photographs still sensitive to exposure. Conversion clause, equity trigger, control rights. All the quiet architecture of future consequences. Part of me wanted to warn him. Another part understood the futility. You can't teach someone a lesson they believe they already mastered. When I stepped out of the room to make copies, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly, an industrial hum that filled the hallway like a subdued anthem. I stared at the document beneath the scanner, watching each page illuminate under the bar of white light. It was a strange sensation, witnessing something transform in real time. Debt becoming leverage, trust becoming structure, naivety becoming language. The copy machine released the pages with a mechanical sigh, as though acknowledging the inevitability of what lay ahead. I gathered the documents, each warm to the touch, warm like something alive. Walking back into the conference room, I saw him tap nervously at his phone, no doubt juggling investors, schedules, or the fear he refused to name. I placed his copy on the table gently, almost tenderly. He looked up. "This will turn everything around," he said. "We just need a little time." Time. The one resource every business claims it can buy, yet always runs out of. I said nothing to correct him. Instead, I watched him tuck the document into his bag, unaware of the weight it carried. Unaware that in the language of finance, salvation and surrender sometimes share the same signature line. 3 weeks later, the notice arrived. The company had become insolvent. Employees whispered, investors vanished, and the once busy Slack channels grew quiet. My brother stood in the middle of the office one morning, staring at his screen like it had betrayed him. "This can't be happening," he said. But it was. The conversion clause activated automatically, clean, legal, inevitable. My debt became equity. My leverage became control. I hadn't forced anything. The math had simply done its job. And as the office settled into that stunned silence, one truth crystallized. Justice doesn't need an audience, only timing. The morning after the insolvency notice, I sat at my kitchen table with the revised agreement opened beside my coffee. Sunlight crept across the page like it was inspecting my work. Every clause I had added, every sentence he had signed was still there, intact, unambiguous. Conversion upon insolvency, automatic equity transfer, full shareholder rights. It wasn't cunning, it was clean. The law didn't need drama to be decisive. I read the document twice, not out of doubt but out of reverence, for accuracy, for clarity, for the quiet certainty of consequences that weren't personal but inevitable. For the first time, I understood the difference between guilt and responsibility. Only one of them requires apology. His call came an hour later. His voice was thin, frayed at the edges. "Can you come in? I need you, please." He rarely used please. When I arrived at the office, he stood by the whiteboard, hands trembling slightly as he erased numbers that no longer mattered. "This isn't fair," he said. "We got hit at the wrong time. The market shifted. Investors pulled back." Every excuse pointed outward, never inward. Then softly, "Just help me fix this. One more time." I closed the door behind me before answering. "Not one more time," I said. "This time I'll help you the way the contract says." He blinked, twice, like I had spoken in a language he hadn't realized I'd learned. I placed the printed agreement on the table between us. My tone was calm, almost gentle. "You signed this. It activated the moment the company became insolvent." He stared at the text, but I could tell he wasn't actually reading it, just absorbing the shape of consequences. "For once," I said quietly, "we're going to follow the rules instead of rewriting them mid-air." He sank into a chair, his posture folding inward. "You're taking everything," he said, voice cracking. "No," I replied. "I'm taking responsibility. You're keeping your lessons." There was no triumph in my chest, only steadiness. I walked to the office door, closed it fully, and pulled the keys from my bag. A small silver ring of them, mine now, legally. I placed one key on the table. "This is the transfer of operational control. I'll file the documents today." He didn't touch it, as if the metal might burn. His silence hovered between us. His silence hovered between us like a held breath. Outside the glass wall, employees moved quietly, pretending not to look in. But I could feel their curiosity, their worry, the collective pause of a company mid-fall. Inside the room, the micro-motif returned, the faint click of the key against the wood, the sound of power shifting hands without force. When I walked toward the administrative wing to file the ownership documents, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that shifted with each step. I felt strangely calm. Not victorious, not vindicated, just aligned, with truth, with law, with the version of myself who no longer confused silence for loyalty. I submitted the papers electronically, a soft tap on the keyboard, a final review, a single click. The system processed it instantly. It didn't congratulate me. It didn't mourn him. It simply acknowledged the reality he had signed into existence, with the ease of someone who didn't believe details mattered. As I left the filing room, I looked back toward his office. Through the glass, I watched him sit motionless, staring at the agreement that had always belonged to both of us, but only one of us bothered to understand. I felt no desire to gloat, no urge to twist the moment into a victory. Instead, I felt a quiet truth settle over me like a light coat. I hadn't toppled him. I had steadied myself. The scales had only returned to balance. And as I turned toward the hallway, one thought followed me with the softness of a closing door. Justice doesn't punish. It restores. He stormed into the office the next morning before the lights had fully warmed. The door banged against the stopper, rattling the glass panels along the hallway. "How could you do this?" he demanded, voice shaking, not with anger alone, but with disbelief that bordered on grief. I stood beside the tall shelves of archived files, steadying myself with a breath. "You didn't even warn me," he continued. "You blindsided me. Your own brother." His words ricocheted off the walls, but I didn't flinch. "You weren't blindsided," I said quietly. "You just didn't read." The silence that followed felt heavier than his shouting ever could. And for the first time, he truly looked at me, not as a sibling, not as an assistant, but as someone he had underestimated. "I trusted you," he said, softer now, as if volume caused the ground beneath him to shift. "You trusted me not to question you," I replied. He blinked, absorbing the distinction, as though the difference between those two truths had never occurred to him before. I walked to the center of the room and took a seat, grounding myself while he paced in frantic figure eights. "This isn't how family treats each other," he muttered. "Family shouldn't treat each other the way you treated me in front of your team," I said, calm, not cruel. His footsteps slowed. The comment hit him differently, more precise, more undeniable. This wasn't about the company anymore. This was about the version of us he had assumed would never change. The micromotif returned with a click as I reached toward the wall and turned on the sharp white overhead light. The brightness washed across his face, carving out the exhaustion, the defensiveness, the cracks of someone finally confronting the truth without refuge. I handed him a printed copy of the agreement. Page 6, conversion rights. His eyes flicked across the paper, then froze. "You added this," he whispered. "You signed it," I corrected. He slumped into the chair opposite mine, shoulders folding inward like they were carrying a weight he could no longer pawn off on anyone else. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was clarity. He held the document with both hands, gripping the edges as if it might steady him. "So that's it," he asked. "You're taking everything." I shook my head. "I'm taking responsibility. That's different." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the text long enough for the room to settle into its natural hum. Through the glass, employees walked past slowly, their faces cautious, uncertain whether this moment was an ending or a recalibration. He finally exhaled, a long, deflating breath. "I didn't think you'd ever do something like this." A thin, almost sad smile touched my lips. "That's the problem. You never thought I could." For a while, neither of us spoke. He leaned back, rubbing his temples, while I watched the morning light slide across the conference table, illuminating the grain of the wood in soft, steady waves. "You could have told me," he said. "You could have listened," I replied. My tone held no accusation, only fact. He swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" "You stay on," I said. "You run operations. But we do this with structure, with discipline, and with honesty." He scoffed lightly. "You're making the rules now." "I'm following the ones that existed," I said. "You just stopped respecting them." The flesh in his face softened, not from anger but from understanding. A long silence finally settled between us, and something in him gave way. Not a collapse, but a yielding. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "We'll learn," I said, "both of us." He didn't argue, didn't defend, didn't push. For the first time in months, the office felt still. As I gathered the documents, he remained seated, staring at the contract, like someone seeing a reflection he'd avoided for too long. When I reached the doorway, he whispered, "I never thought you'd outgrow me." I paused. "I didn't outgrow you," I said. "I just stopped shrinking." The title change went live the following Monday. A simple database update, a few clicks from HR, and suddenly, my name appeared on the internal dashboard under a new heading, Majority Shareholder. The words didn't glow, didn't celebrate, they just existed, factual and unemotional. But the effect across the office was immediate. Conversation shifted mid-sentence when I walked by. Chairs straightened, screens closed a little faster. I stepped into the first all-hands meeting with a steady, measured breath. People look at me the way they look at a sunrise they weren't expecting. Curious, cautious, a little unsure if they should admire or shield their eyes. It wasn't attention I wanted, it was alignment. And for the first time, the room felt ready to hear me. I opened the meeting with a single line. "Let's get clear about where we're going." No theatrics, no dramatic pause, just clarity. He sat to my right, my brother, tense but silent. The weight of recent days still hung around him like unshaken dust. I laid out the facts.
current cash on hand, outstanding debts, the realistic runway. No sugarcoating, no apocalypse branding, just truth, stripped to structure. People listened, really listened. Not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't. When I finished, someone in the back raised a hand. So who signs off on final decisions now? I answered simply, I do. A shift moved through the room. Quiet, undeniable.
Like gravity reasserting itself. For a moment, the team seemed suspended between old hierarchy and new reality. My brother's jaw tightened, but he didn't contradict me. He knew he couldn't, not this time. I turned to him, giving him the same respect I wanted in return. You will continue as CEO, I said, but operational oversight comes through me. A collective inhale rose from the room, as if everyone suddenly remembered the rules of breathing. He nodded once, almost reluctantly. We can make that work, he said. It wasn't generous, it was necessary, and necessity, I'd learned, doesn't ask for approval. After the meeting, I placed my office keys on the conference table, just for a moment, letting the overhead lights catch on the metal. The subtle flash mirrored the earlier motif, the quiet reminder of control shifting its center of gravity. This isn't about taking your place, I said to him. He looked at the keys, then at me, and for the first time, I saw something uncluttered in his eyes. I know, he said. It wasn't surrender, it wasn't peace. It was recognition, the beginning of it at least. He picked up the keys and returned them, pushing them gently back toward me. No, you keep them. It makes sense. Throughout the afternoon, employees approached me one by one. Not with flattery, thankfully, but with considerations, concerns, clarifications. Can we streamline the vendor approvals? Are we revising the product roadmap? What happens next quarter? Each question was a small act of trust. Not the blind kind I'd once given, but the earned kind. I responded with calm precision, and something inside me softened, not with pride but with belonging. In the reflection of the office windows, I saw a version of myself that had always existed, just hidden beneath years of lowering my voice so others could raise theirs. Now the volume balanced itself. At the end of the day, I returned to my desk and sat alone in the half-lit office, listening to the soft hum of machines powering down. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't mourning. I was adjusting, like eyes learning to see in a new kind of light. My brother stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. So, I still have a job, he said with a thin smile. You do, I answered. Just not the same one you imagined. He nodded, absorbing the new parameters. As he left, the door clicked softly behind him, a punctuation mark, not an ending. The reversal was complete, not as a victory but as a recalibration. He moved into the smaller office down the hall, a space once used for storage now cleared just enough to look intentional. The downgrade wasn't punishment, it was proportional. Still, the relocation carried a faint sorrow, like seeing someone return a suit they never quite fit into. Through the glass, I watched him adjust the lone desk lamp, then sit with his shoulders rounded. Not in defeat, but in recalibration. There was no yelling, no resistance, just a quiet settling. He worked with an unfamiliar caution, reviewing documents slowly, almost reverently. The transformation wasn't dramatic, it was subtle. Like a dimmer switch turning down pride and turning up awareness. Sometimes aftermath doesn't announce itself. It simply rearranges the air. I brought him a cup of coffee mid-morning, the steam rising in soft spirals that caught the slant of sunlight. He glanced up, surprised. Not by the gesture, but by what it symbolized. You still make it too strong, he said, but his tone lacked its old edge. You still drink it anyway, I replied. He took the cup, inhaled the bitterness as if it steadied him. A long silence stretched between us. Not cold, not warm, just honest. Without looking at me, he said, "Thanks for not shutting me out completely." I leaned against the doorframe. "You're my brother. I'm not your punishment." His eyes softened, and for the first time I believed he was listening. A memory flickered to life. The two of us as kids, sitting on opposite ends of the kitchen table, doing homework while our mother made soup. He corrected my spelling with patience, not condescension. I helped him with fractions he struggled to admit he didn't understand. Back then, we were a team without needing to define what that meant. Now we were two adults learning to reconfigure the blueprint of a bond that had bent under years of unspoken expectations. I wondered if all siblings eventually reached a moment like this, where old dynamics crumble quietly, leaving room for a version of the relationship that might actually work. The coffee's steam curled upward, merging with the faint dust floating in the office light. That small swirl reminded me of something I'd been avoiding. The first day he pitched me the startup. The hopeful brightness in his eyes. The belief that we were building something together. Maybe he didn't set out to use me. Maybe he simply assumed I would always fold myself into whatever shape he needed. Assumption is a slow erosion. It removes equality grain by grain. Now, standing in his doorway, I could see him visibly confronting the cost of those assumptions. It wasn't a punishment I delivered. It was a truth the circumstances forced. Later in the afternoon, I watched from my office as he carried a stack of files to the break room. Not delegating, not shouting, just working. Real work. The kind he used to consider beneath him. There was something strangely grounding about seeing him wipe down the counter afterward, as if tending to small order helped him rebuild internal structure. "Things are different now," he said when he passed my door. "Yes," I replied. "Different doesn't mean worse." He nodded slowly, the acceptance settling deeper, more real. Sometimes accountability isn't a cliff. It's a staircase. One descends with steadying hands. That evening as I packed my bag, I saw him through the glass wall, still typing, still focused, still present in a way he hadn't been for months. There was no resentment on his face, only concentration, fatigue, and something gentler, humility reshaping him from the inside. For the first time since the collapse, the office didn't feel divided between his and mine. It felt like a place where things could be repaired. I walked toward the door, turning off the desk lamp as I left. Behind me, his smaller office glowed a faint, warm yellow. And in that subtle light, a truth became unmistakable. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of growing up. I called for an internal audit the following Monday. Nothing dramatic, nothing accusatory, just a simple email. "We'll be reviewing the last 12 months of spending. Standard procedure. But procedure is never truly standard in a company that's been run on instinct more than structure." In the conference room, I set a small voice recorder on the table. "This is just to keep things clear," I said. My tone wasn't cold, simply precise. Across from me, the finance lead shifted nervously in her chair. The air felt taut, like fabric stretched one tug away from tearing. I opened the first folder and inhaled. "Let's begin." It wasn't power I felt, it was order, finally returning to a place that had long run on chaos disguised as creativity. The discrepancies appeared early and often. Minor at first, missing signatures, untethered receipts, transfers justified with vague descriptions like client appreciation. But then came the larger anomalies. Gift baskets double billed. Weekend retreats categorized as strategic alignment. A dinner expense that rivaled a wedding menu. None of it malicious, just careless. Sloppy systems make sloppy leaders. "We need documentation for these," I said, tapping the page lightly. The operations manager looked down, cheeks flushed. I didn't think it mattered." I wrote a note in the margin. "Matters now." Even the fluorescent lights seemed to brighten at the acknowledgement. My brother entered halfway through the session, pausing when he saw the spread of paperwork. His eyes flicked to the recorder. "You're recording this?" "Yes," I replied. "Transparency protects everyone." He hesitated, then took a seat, not beside me but across, as if acknowledging a new seating chart in our roles. "We'll fix this," I said, "but we won't hide it." He didn't argue, though I saw defensiveness flicker in the tightening of his jaw. For once he didn't override or dismiss. He listened. A small but meaningful shift, the beginning of cooperation instead of command. We built a checklist. Repay improperly allocated expenses. Reissue receipts where missing. Freeze discretionary spending. Rebuild every undocumented transaction. As I typed each line, the rhythmic clatter of the keyboard echoed a steadying heartbeat, one that belonged more to the company than to either of us. The room felt different now, not tense but aligned, like furniture finally arranged the way it should have been from the start. My brother leaned forward, elbows on the table, studying the details, without excuses or theatrics. It struck me how unfamiliar this version of him was, and how needed. By late afternoon, the team began offering apologies, quiet ones, tentative ones. "Sorry for the oversight. We should have been more diligent. We'll do better." Their sincerity wasn't groveling, it was clarity. I nodded, acknowledging each without rubbing salt into wounds. The glow from the computer screens reflected in my eyes, a cold but fair light. This wasn't about blame. It was about rebuilding rhythm, rebuilding trust, not the blind kind, but the kind that grows from consistency and accountability. A kind I wished we had started with. Just as we wrapped the session, a notification pinged on my laptop, a forwarded email with no subject line. The preview text read, "You should know what she's doing." Anonymous. No greeting, no signature. My pulse dipped, not from fear but from recognition. When structure arrives, resistance follows. I opened it. Screenshots. Speculation. A rumor thread about my power grab. I exhaled slowly, closing the laptop. "Everything okay?" my brother asked. I met his eyes. "Just noise." But I knew what came next. When truth confronts ego, someone always starts whispering. The audit was over. The storm was beginning. The screenshots spread faster than facts ever could. A harmless internal memo, forwarded, snapped, cropped, and twisted, found its way onto a community forum where anonymity made everyone bold. She seized the company. She pushed her own brother aside. She planned it from the beginning. None of it surprised me. When power shifts, narratives scramble to catch up, and some people would rather invent a story than accept a simple, inconvenient truth. I scrolled through the comments once, letting each accusation pass like cars on a freeway. Loud, fast, forgettable. My thumb hovered over the post-reply button. One tap could defend me. One tap could escalate everything. Instead, I locked my phone and set it face down. Silence would tell the better story. The investor who once championed my brother called that afternoon, his voice clipped with restrained diplomacy. "Are you stable now?" he asked. "Operationally." I held the phone between two fingers, watching dust float lazily in a shaft of sunlight. "We're not only stable," I said. "We're becoming precise." He paused, recalculating his assumptions. "Good, that's reassuring." But his hesitation revealed how quickly people recalibrate allegiance. I ended the call politely, then let the quiet settle around me. Trust, I realized, was just another currency, one easily spent, rarely earned back without proof. And right now, proof mattered more than reassurance. By midweek, 2 partners requested temporary pauses on collaborative projects. The phrasing was cordial, but the subtext was unmistakable. "We're waiting to see if you implode." I responded with measured professionalism, offering updates, revised timelines, data projections. No defensiveness, no desperation. Then, instead of sending emails into a void of speculation, I called each partner personally. My voice steady, my tone warm but firm. People forget how much steadiness can be conveyed through breath alone. By the end of each call, I felt the shift. Wariness softening into curiosity, curiosity into respect. In uncertain times, clarity is a form of hospitality. The younger employees were the first to defend me without being prompted. "She's the only adult in the room," one wrote in a message thread I wasn't supposed to see. Another commented, "She's fixing messes we didn't even know were messes." I didn't respond, of course, but I paused, letting the acknowledgement settle into a place inside me that rarely received validation. Still, I didn't let it anchor me. Praise and criticism were two ends of the same rope, and I wasn't climbing it blindly anymore. I kept my focus on the work, rebuilding structure with steadiness, not applause. My brother, to his credit, stayed silent publicly. No defensive posts, no indirect comments, no attempts to reclaim a throne that had already proven too heavy. In the weekly staff meeting, he looked tired but clear-eyed. Not broken. Changed. He stepped forward during Q&A but didn't dominate it. When a reporter reached out to him for a quote, he declined. The restraint startled me, like seeing a cracked mirror suddenly reflect clean lines. Growth looks strange on someone who once relied on volume instead of humility. Late one evening, just as I was packing up, a new email arrived from a legal team representing a partner company. Subject: Potential Legal Risk Inquiry. Short, formal, barely veiling suspicion. Attached was a PDF requesting documentation of the ownership transfer, budget revisions, and audit logs. I stared at the blinking cursor for a moment, feeling neither dread nor irritation, just the familiar weight of being watched in a moment of transition. Then, as if on cue, the micro-motif returned. The soft click of my pen in my hand, a sound that meant readiness, not fear. The storm had reached my doorstep, and this time, I wasn't bracing, I was prepared. Late the next morning, I found myself standing in front of the office's glass wall, the one that usually reflected little more than fluorescent lights and tired employees. But today it reflected me, a woman holding a legal folder against her chest, jaw set, eyes clear. The coffee in my other hand sent up thin ribbons of steam, curling like a quiet reminder that heat rises even when we don't notice. Behind my reflection, the office hummed with a low, nervous energy, the kind that happens when rumors collide with reality. I clicked my pen once, twice. The micro-motifs gathered, the glow of my laptop screen behind me, the soft hiss of the radiator, the steady pulse of a decision forming. I wasn't admiring myself. I was recognizing myself. For the first time in months, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. Was I doing the right thing? Or was I just finally winning? The difference mattered. Winning can seduce. Justice stays quiet. I stared at my reflection, analyzing the woman in the glass. The way one studies a witness, not a heroine. My heartbeat felt steady, too steady for vanity. I wasn't trying to conquer him. I was trying to correct us. The motivation wasn't revenge, it was repair. Of the company, of the dynamic between us, of the part of me that had learned to shrink to keep the peace. Seeing that truth made the air around me feel lighter, almost breathable. The email from the partner's legal counsel still sat open on my screen, waiting. They wanted documentation, clarity, receipts. Fine. I attached the revised contract he'd signed months ago, highlighting the conversion clause in quiet yellow, not dramatic red. I added the audit logs, the timestamps, the board notes. The cursor blinked patiently at the bottom of the message, as if asking whether I wanted to add anything else. An explanation, an apology, a plea. I added none. Facts don't need tone. Before hitting send, I took a final look at the email, each sentence clean and exact. The screen cast a faint bluish glow in my hands, the kind of light that makes truth look clinical, not cruel. I called my brother into the conference room. He entered cautiously, holding a notebook as if it were some sort of peace offering. We have a response due today, I said. We can reply together if you want. He lowered into the chair across from me, avoiding my eyes at first. Together, he repeated quietly, like the word was a muscle he hadn't used in years. I walked him through the email, line by line. He listened without interrupting, without deflecting, without spiraling into blame. When I finished, he whispered, "Thank you for including me." I nodded. Inclusion wasn't mercy, it was maturity. We drafted the final paragraph together, short, factual, aligned. No defensiveness, no dramatics, just accountability. When it came time to sign, he hesitated, only for a second, before clicking his pen and writing his name beneath mine. The small sound of the pen closing echoed across the room, marking not just a signature but a shift, a co-authorship instead of a conflict. For the first time, I felt the edges of partnership reforming, not the fantasy kind but the functional kind. I saved the document. He exhaled. The company felt, for a moment, like a place where we both belonged. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened a draft email I'd written weeks ago. A message offering the company for sale, a clean exit, a way out. My finger hovered over the trash icon. Instead of deleting, I read it carefully, slowly, like someone examining a version of themselves they no longer inhabit. The cursor blinked under the send button, a small pulse of temptation. But I didn't send it. I closed the laptop gently, letting the micro-motif settle. A quiet decision, a quiet refusal. Walking to the window, I tasted a strange new feeling. Not victory, not surrender. Possibility. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something that would happen to me. It felt like something I could choose. The office after hours felt like a different planet, stripped of its daytime noise, reduced to the soft hum of the HVAC and the distant tick of a wall clock. Only my screen stayed lit, a lone rectangle of blue in a dim gray room. The draft email titled Acquisition Inquiry glowed at the top of my inbox, waiting like a crossroads. I opened it, reread the words I once wrote in exhaustion and escape. Then, with a slow inhale, I highlighted the entire message and pressed delete. The empty screen stared back at me, calm and unburdened. A decision made without fanfare is still a decision. I whispered to the empty room, "Not yet. Not like this." The cursor blinked, as if nodding. The door creaked open a few minutes later. My brother stepped in, with a takeout box balanced in one hand, chopsticks sticking out crookedly, like a peace flag. "You ate?" he asked, voice quieter than usual. I shook my head, and he placed the box on the floor before sitting beside it, cross-legged, like we used to as kids, during living room movie nights. We ate in silence at first, the soft rustle of noodles and plastic forks filling the space. Outside, the city lights flickered against the windows, casting moving shadows across our faces. It felt strangely normal. Two siblings sharing cheap food at a late hour, stripped of ego and roles. Just two people trying to figure out how not to break what remained. When we finished eating, he wiped his hands on a napkin and leaned back against the filing cabinet. "I was arrogant," he said. "I thought leading meant speaking the loudest." I nodded, not encouraging, not dismissing, just listening. "It doesn't," I said eventually. "It usually means speaking last." He let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite.
I don't know how to fix everything, he admitted. You're not supposed to fix everything alone, I replied. The words hung between us, soft but firm, like repairing threads in a frayed rope, not tying a new one. We moved to the whiteboard, where complicated to-do lists had hardened into visual clutter. 30 days, I said. Let's start with that. He nodded,
grabbing a marker, the cap clicking nervously in his fingers. We created a new list: clean, honest, realistic. Cut unnecessary spending. Rebuild customer support. Simplify the product roadmap. Schedule weekly syncs, not monologues, but actual conversations. As each item appeared on the board, the room felt less chaotic. He uncapped a stack of pastel sticky notes and placed them along the edge of the glass wall. Small squares of responsibility, each waiting for action. It was the most adult teamwork we'd ever done. "I don't want to sell," I said, once the board was full. His eyes lifted, surprised. Not because he wanted me to sell, but because he had been waiting for my decision like it was a verdict. "We try for 1 quarter," I continued. 1 clean, disciplined quarter. If it doesn't work, we consider options." He nodded slowly. "I can do that." His agreement felt different this time. Not reluctant, not performative. Aligned. The fluorescent overhead lights flickered softly, settling into a steady glow, as if the room itself approved of our terms. We closed the meeting room lights and walked toward the exit together. The hallway bulbs clicked on one by one as we passed, illuminating patches of carpet in slow succession. The synchronization of our footsteps surprised me, 2 rhythms falling into one. At the glass door he paused. "This feels new," he said. "It is," I replied. Neither of us said goodnight. Words felt unnecessary. As I watched him walk to his car, the micro-motif flickered through my mind. The gentle blink of the send button I hadn't pressed. Some decisions shape a company. Some decisions reshape a family. Tonight, I had made both. The morning of the 90-minute strategy meeting, the office felt unusually still, like the building itself was holding its breath. People filed into the conference room slowly, careful, as if entering a space where history might shift a little. I stood at the front, palms resting lightly on the table. "We're starting fresh," I said. 3 principles: transparency, discipline, dignity. 40 words, no more. The kind of brevity that cuts through fog. I watched faces soften, eyebrows lift, shoulders unclench. My brother sat in the second row, not at the head, not in the corner, somewhere in the middle, where he could participate without eclipsing. The balance felt right, not symbolic but earned. A room full of people finally ready to listen. Then my brother stood. He cleared his throat, eyes fixed ahead, not searching for applause or approval. "From now on," he said, "we report to her, including me." A ripple moved through the room, whispers, exchanged glances, the soft rustle of surprise. I didn't flinch. He wasn't giving me power I didn't already have. He was acknowledging the truth of it. His voice wavered slightly at the end, not from fear, but from humility trying to find its footing. And in that moment, the hierarchy that once weighed heavily between us dissolved into something cleaner, shared, balanced, real. I dimmed the lights and opened the first slide. Simple, no animations, just a white background, black text. 90-day plan. We would scale back to a smaller, leaner product. Cut vanity partnerships. Prioritize paying clients over speculative ones. Strengthen customer support. Focus on predictable revenue rather than flashy growth. My brother took notes. Actual notes. Scribbling thoughtfully instead of defensively. When he raised his hand to ask a question, he waited his turn. Respect, I realized, isn't loud, it's orderly. Halfway through the meeting, an inevitable topic surfaced. Compensation.
"I'll reduce my salary by half," he said before anyone else spoke. The room went quiet. Not dramatic quiet, respectful quiet. He wasn't grandstanding, he was correcting. The leadership team nodded slowly, some even exhaling with relief. I didn't thank him or make a speech. I just wrote the adjustment on the board and moved on. Sometimes maturity is a line item, not a gesture. And this one, though simple, mattered more than any apology he could have crafted. After the meeting, people drifted out in small clusters, murmuring about timelines and next steps. I stayed behind to gather leftover sticky notes and abandoned pens. The room looked different now, emptier, steadier, almost grounded. As I bent to pick up a crumpled paper cup, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the darkened TV screen. Not stern, not triumphant, just present. Respect, like responsibility, begins with small gestures. Cleaning a room you lead isn't humility, it's clarity. A reminder that leadership isn't a pedestal, it's a posture. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed. Mom calling. Her name glowed against the screen, bright in the dim corridor. I hesitated for a breath, only a breath. But it was enough to acknowledge the weight of what might come next. Family conversations didn't follow logic, only emotion. I answered. "Are you free?" she asked, voice clipped with urgency. "We need to talk." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I stood still, bracing not for conflict but for truth. The company was stabilizing, but family? That was a different kind of audit. I took my mother's call in the break room, the only place in the office where the hum of the refrigerator might soften whatever was coming. Her voice arrived sharp, already warmed with disappointment. "I heard what you did to your brother," she said. No greeting, no pause. I leaned against the counter, letting the cool laminate steady my spine. "I didn't do anything to him," I replied.
I stopped letting him do everything to me. She exhaled harshly. "You've made him suffer. Losing control, losing face. That's not how family behaves." Her words tried to carve guilt into me, but something inside stayed firm, like stone refusing a chisel. "Mom," I said quietly. I stopped letting myself be the only one who pays the cost. She shifted to the oldest argument in the family book. "He's your brother. Blood should mean something." I closed my eyes. Blood means we're connected. It doesn't mean I should let him run over me. "He needs you," she insisted. "Family helps." "I am helping," I said. "Just not in ways that protect his ego." Silence. A silence that felt less like a pause and more like a verdict being rewritten. "You've changed," she finally said, as if the transformation were a flaw rather than a growth. "Maybe I finally stopped confusing loyalty with silence," I answered. My voice stayed calm, not defensive, steady as a metronome finding its correct tempo for the first time. While she spoke, my brother appeared quietly in the doorway. He didn't interrupt, didn't gesture. He just stood there, listening, his posture small but his expression open in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. "I'm only saying this because I care," my mother continued, unaware of her audience. "You're making things harder for him." I met his eyes. "Mom," I said softly, "maybe things are hard because he's learning something he avoided for years." He swallowed, eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite name. Humility? Regret? Recognition? He didn't look away, not this time. And in that moment, I understood the power of a boundary spoken out loud. After the call, I set my phone on the table and let the silence widen. The break room felt almost reverent, like the air was clearing old dust. My brother stepped closer, stopping a careful distance away. "You didn't have to. You didn't have to defend me," he said. "I wasn't," I replied. "I was defending me." The spoon in the abandoned coffee mug clinked lightly as it cooled. Another quiet motif. Another reminder that heat fades but doesn't disappear. He nodded slowly, taking in the truth without arguing or retreating. Maybe for the first time, he understood that being siblings didn't mean I had to fit the shape he preferred. Before leaving the room, I opened my laptop and typed a one-line email to the entire family thread. "Going forward, let's keep business and family separate." One sentence. One period. A boundary, not a plea. I hit send. No explanations. No justifications. Just a line drawn exactly where it needed to be. Standing from the table, I felt a quiet steadiness anchor itself inside my chest. Something firm, something earned. Family could still exist, but not at the cost of selfhood. When I returned to my office, a small envelope lay on the floor just inside the doorway, as if someone had slid it gently under the crack. My name was written on the front in handwriting I knew as well as my own, my brother's. No flourish, no urgency, just a simple familiar script. I picked it up and felt the weight of it, light but intentional. Whatever was inside wasn't an argument or a defense. It felt like a beginning, a question, a mirror, a chance. And as the evening light stretched across my desk, turning the envelope gold at the edges, I realized I wasn't afraid of what it might say. Growth, after all, is rarely gentle, but it is honest. I closed my office door before opening the envelope. The hush of the room made even the sound of paper sliding free feel intimate, like a confession unfolding in my hands. His handwriting filled the page, crooked in places, rushed in others, as if sincerity had outrun neatness. I'm sorry. I learned the hard way. The first line alone made my breath tighten. He wrote about the pressure he'd felt, how fear had made him controlling, how pride had made him dismissive. A small drop of coffee had stained the corner of the page, dark, imperfect, human. I traced the mark with my thumb, surprised by the ache that surfaced. Apologies, when real, don't shout. They land softly and echo. He admitted something I never expected him to articulate. I didn't want my little sister to be right about me. The words sat heavy on the page, vulnerable enough to feel like a wound left uncovered. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. Some truths are so quiet they feel like they whisper directly to the part of you that still remembers childhood bruises and playground loyalties. He wrote that he had mistaken authority for competence, volume for leadership, and my silence for agreement. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to bargain. He simply told the truth. And in its own way, that was more powerful than any apology rehearsed in front of a mirror. When I finished reading, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. Its own kind of archive, a shelf where only essential things lived. Not sentimental things, honest things. I didn't cry. Tears weren't the currency we dealt in. Instead, I sat for a moment with the weight of it, what it meant. To finally see him take responsibility without collapsing under it. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't an emotion. It was a discipline. A choice to move forward, not because the past didn't hurt, but because the future asked for something better from both of us. The afternoon meeting flowed differently. My brother presented a proposal to adjust our KPIs, scaling down unrealistic projections, increasing focus on customer retention instead of vanity metrics. When he finished, he looked directly at me, not for approval, but for alignment. Yes, I said. Approved. One word. Steady and clean. His shoulders eased, and the room's energy shifted, less rigid, more grounded. The team noticed. Respect, once withheld, had begun returning in small, intentional folds. Sometimes progress doesn't look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like two people finally speaking the same language. Later, I reviewed the company's revenue chart, just a thin green line nudging upward, barely perceptible unless you squinted. But it was movement. Not a surge, not a miracle, just a quiet upward tick. The kind that comes from consistency, not luck. I updated the monthly report with a small note. Trend positive. Maintain discipline. The phrase felt like a mantra, one that applied to us just as much as the business. Progress rarely announces itself. It shows up like a polite guest. Soft knock, gentle step, patient presence. As I packed my bag, an email notification slid across my screen. Subject: Local Growth Fund, Minority Investment Offer. A formal invitation. A cautious one, but an invitation nonetheless. I read it slowly, letting the implications settle. New doors opening. Old habits closing. My brother paused by my doorway on his way out. Everything okay? I held up the email. We've got interest. His eyes widened. Not with greed, but with hope. A fragile, earned hope. And for the first time in this long, unraveling journey, the future didn't feel like a burden to carry. It felt like a direction to choose. The due diligence call with the local growth fund took place on a calm Wednesday morning. The sky outside the office windows looked washed clean. The city softened under a pale blue haze. We're prepared to take a minority position, 30%, the lead partner said. You retain full control. Control used to feel like a battlefield. Now it felt like a tool. Useful, not intoxicating. I counted my breaths quietly, then agreed. When the contract arrived, I reviewed every line with deliberate care. No blind trust. No blurred edges. I signed slowly, letting the pen glide with intention. The signature didn't feel triumphant. It felt like alignment, like the company finally standing on steady legs instead of borrowed balance. Their conditions were simple. No interference for 90 days, weekly check-ins, support on distribution and data, nothing more. We're partners, the investor said, not parents. The phrasing made me exhale. Relief mixed with a hint of gratitude. For the first time, an outside entity wasn't trying to control us, only bolster us. After the call, I typed up a welcome email to the advisory team. Short, clear, professional. No emoji, no exclamation marks. Just clarity. The kind of clarity I wished we'd had from the beginning. When the congratulations messages started chiming in, I muted the notifications. It wasn't the noise I needed. It was the work. Around lunchtime, my brother knocked on my door. So, are we celebrating? He asked. Hopeful, but cautious. Pizza in the break room, I suggested. No champagne, no photo ops. Just something simple, something human. He smiled. Small, sincere. Yeah, that sounds right. When the team gathered, the energy was different. Not giddy, not tense. Balanced. They joked lightly, shared slices, argued over toppings. For once, the laughter didn't feel like a mask over chaos. It felt like breath returning to a room that had been holding it for too long. Later that night, after everyone left, the office returned to its quiet hum. I reviewed the incoming funds, updated the cap table, and filed the new ownership documents. Numbers steadied me in ways emotions never could. Before shutting down my laptop, I drafted an internal memo outlining our new responsibilities and the expectations for the next quarter. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy-handed. Just structure. I thought about how easily power can drift when left unchecked, and how carefully it must be tended when shared. I saved the memo and felt a rare sense of calm settle in my chest, like a room finally cleaned after months of clutter. Before heading home, I forwarded a portion of the new capital to our emergency reserve account. No announcement, no ribbon around the gesture, just stewardship. Money behaves better when treated with quiet discipline. As I closed the banking window, a thought surfaced. Simple, sharp. Security isn't loud. It's consistent. My brother appeared briefly at my doorway, jacket in hand. Thanks, he said. No context, no explanation. But I understood. Gratitude has its own grammar. Sometimes it requires only one word. Just as I turned off the office lights, my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Quarter-end review, next week. A long hallway stretched before me, illuminated by a row of flickering fluorescent tubes. My brother walked beside me, our steps falling into a synchronized rhythm neither of us commented on. We didn't need words. The quiet itself felt like progress. Two people who used to clash now moving in parallel. As we reached the glass door, I glanced back at the office one last time. Nothing glittered. Nothing glowed. But everything felt earned. The quarter-end review arrived with no fanfare. Just a soft notification on my screen and a neatly organized PDF from the advisory fund. Numbers don't celebrate. They simply tell the truth. Revenue, on target. Churn, reduced. Customer satisfaction, trending upward. No fireworks, no victories to parade. Just a quiet confirmation that discipline works. When I gathered the team, I didn't raise my voice or stretch a smile too wide. We hit the plan, I said simply. A hum of acknowledgement moved through the room. Not excitement. Relief. Enough is elegant, I thought. Sometimes progress doesn't need applause. Sometimes it only needs proof. My brother and I walked the long hallway after the meeting, neither of us speaking. Our footsteps echoed softly, the sounds steady and measured. There was something comforting about the silence. Not avoidance, but equilibrium. For the first time in years, we weren't orbiting each other through guilt or expectation. We were simply two people moving forward at the same pace. He glanced at me briefly.
"Feels different now," he murmured.
"It does," I said. Not a celebration, not a resolution, just a recognition that something had finally settled into place. Near the end of the hallway, he stopped. "Thanks for not selling me with the company," he said, voice low but clear. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a version of my brother I hadn't seen since we were kids, before pride built walls around him. "I needed you to stay," I replied. "Not to pay." He blinked, absorbing the line slowly, as if the words had weight he wasn't accustomed to carrying. A quiet understanding passed between us, a recalibration of roles, of expectations, of who we were allowed to become separate from old stories. We reached the window overlooking the shared workspace. Our team moved through the room with a kind of easy cohesion, exchanging notes, checking metrics, laughing in short bursts. The overhead lights cast a softer glow than they used to, or maybe the sharpness in us had dulled enough to let the light feel gentler. My brother stood beside me, hands loosely in his pockets. "They're starting to trust me again," he said. "They're starting to trust us," I corrected. He nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting, not a proud smile, but a relieved one. The kind that comes after a long breath finally released. Back in my office, I removed my name badge to replace the outdated label. A small adhesive tab with the word "acting" still clung to the corner, barely visible, almost laughably small compared to the journey it represented. I peeled it off. The sound was soft, almost like a sigh. My shoulders felt lighter, as if some invisible tether had been quietly loosened. Titles don't define leadership, but they reflect alignment, and alignment mattered now more than ever. I placed the badge back on my shirt, simple and unembellished. For once, it didn't feel like a costume. It felt like skin. When I returned to my desk, something on the surface caught my eye. A wooden frame, empty but polished, placed there deliberately. No note, no explanation, just the frame. I lifted it gently, brushing my thumb over the smooth edges. It was waiting, patient, expectant, for a single document that had rewritten our entire story. The convertible note, the first signature, the turning point. Some endings aren't grand. Some are as quiet as a frame waiting for the paper that changed everything. And standing there in the hush of the late afternoon, I understood. Balance isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of clarity. The frame sat on my desk for 2 days before I touched it again. A silent invitation. A question shaped from wood and intention. Late Friday evening, long after most of the team had gone home,
I finally opened the drawer and pulled out the document that had started everything. The convertible note, creased from months of handling, edges faintly softened by time. I laid it on the desk beneath the warm spill of my desk lamp. The office around me felt suspended in amber, holding its breath, as I ran a fingertip along the line where his signature curved. This wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a weapon. It was a witness of choices, of consequences, of growth that had demanded everything and returned something quieter: dignity. My brother knocked softly before entering, pausing at the threshold, the way someone does when they're stepping into a place they once took for granted. He nodded toward the document. "So, you're framing it?" "Not as revenge," I said. "As reminder." He walked closer, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. "I used to think leadership meant never admitting you were wrong," he said. "Then I learned that being wrong isn't the danger. Staying wrong is." I smiled faintly, small, tired, real. We stood together over the paper that had once divided us, the glow of the lamp softening its sharp edges. Sometimes closure is quiet. Sometimes it simply stands beside you, without demanding forgiveness.
He reached out and traced the date printed in the top right corner. "That day," he said, exhaling, "I thought I was saving the company."
"And I thought I was saving you," I answered. We both paused, two truths finally allowed to exist at the same table. "I'm glad things didn't go the way either of us planned," he admitted. I looked at him. "Because we learned?" He shook his head. "Because we grew." The distinction mattered. Growth hurts. Learning explains the hurt. Together they make a life you can live with. I slid the document into the frame, smoothing its corners so it lay flat. The glass clicked gently into place, another micromotif, another quiet punctuation mark, in a story that had resisted neat endings. My brother stepped back, arms crossed, not judging but absorbing. "You know," he said softly, "I used to be afraid of you being stronger than me." I looked up. "And now?" He hesitated, then answered with a strange, vulnerable honesty. "Now I'm afraid of not keeping up." I laughed, not out of mockery but out of recognition. "Then keep up," I said gently. "Or don't. But I'm done slowing down." We hung the frame on the wall together, next to the company's first incorporation certificate. Two documents born from two completely different versions of us. The room felt different once it was mounted. Balanced, grounded, almost whole. My brother stepped back, hands on his hips. "It looks official," he said. "It is." He nodded slowly. "Then so are we." The overhead lights dimmed automatically for evening mode, bathing the office in warm gold. For once the glow didn't feel harsh or lonely. It felt earned. It felt like the kind of ending that leaves the door cracked open for whatever comes next. When he left for the night, I stayed behind, standing alone in front of the framed document. The ink, the signatures, the dates. They were all the same as the day he signed it. But I wasn't. We weren't. The frame didn't symbolize victory or defeat. It symbolized balance. Hard-won, imperfect, but real. A reminder that sometimes justice is quiet, and sometimes it looks nothing like punishment. I turned off the lamp and stepped into the hallway, letting the darkness settle around me. Behind me, the frame caught the last sliver of light from the door. A soft glint. A final motif. And with it the story closed, not with triumph, but with truth. In the end, I didn't frame the convertible note because it represented power. I framed it because it represented truth. Quiet, unpolished, undeniable truth. The moment my brother signed it, our story changed. Not because he fell, but because I finally stopped falling with him. That frame now hangs on the wall beside our incorporation certificate. 2 documents, 2 beginnings. One built on hope, the other built on honesty. And somehow both were necessary for us to grow into people who could finally stand side by side, instead of stacked on top of each other. Justice didn't roar. It whispered. It taught. It restored. And now when I walk out of the office each night, I don't feel victorious. I feel balanced, steady, whole. The kind of whole that doesn't require someone else to break. If this story made you think about family, about boundaries, about the cost of staying silent, leave a comment below. Tell me what part hit you hardest or what chapter felt like your own. And if you want more stories like this, quiet confrontations, emotional truth, and endings that don't chase applause, make sure to subscribe to the channel.